Welcome, everybody, to the Let Purple Rain podcast. Please like and subscribe to the channel. This is our very first episode of 2025, and I am your host, Joe Arpasi, otherwise known as Purple Rain. I started my CFF work in 2008. After stepping away for 8 years, I returned in 2024 as Purple Rain. You can find all of my content on letpurplerain.com. And last week, I posted an article on bowl breakout players. These are players with names to stash away and keep an eye on over spring camps. For today's show, our guest needs no introduction whatsoever. It is the Gridiron Scholar, Mr. John Laub. John, you have a ton of places that you do work at. I know Rookie Big Board is one of them. How have you been, and what are some of the other places that you do work at?
I'm doing great, man. I'm enjoying the college football playoffs. I know people have been poo-pooing it, but the games have been getting better as we're moving forward. I do think we're still at a very small sample size, so I think it's not fair to judge like the first 3 or 4 games. I enjoyed last night's game. We're taping. It was Penn State, Notre Dame. We got a big game tonight, Ohio State, Texas. So I'm enjoying it. I think the finals should be a very good matchup, whoever Notre Dame plays. This is really early in the process, but the transfer portal has basically made college football 365 day a year, just like the NFL. I mean, there was a time 10 years ago, we'd be done with the season. Maybe we might have had a championship game like January 11th or something like that. But we would be, for the most part, done by now. And you might not hear until spring kicks off, right? The practices. But with the transfer portal, there's all types of action going on, so it keeps you busier. But I am knee-deep in NFL draft prospect analysis. I'm probably spending, 3-4 hours every day getting ready for the Senior Bowl and the NFL draft. So that's my main focus. Obviously, I have a list that I keep of transfer players who I'm, interested in moving forward. But yes, I'm on Rookie Big Board. That is coming out, and Player Profiler is all my written player prospects.
Gotcha. And I'm honored to have John on the show today. For those of you guys that don't know, John and I go way back, back when I was co-owner and operator of College Football Geek. Excuse me. John came on as a writer somewhere in the early 2010s. I couldn't even tell you the exact year. And I did look up, John, you came into my keeper league. My home league that I run, I've been running since 2010. John's been 2025. This is going to be your 10th year in my home league.
My God.
I know.
It just means I'm old.
We both are.
Literally.
But yeah, John and I go back a long ways. It's awesome having him as my first guest in 2025 and the new revamped Let Purple Rain podcast. For today's show here, we are doing the main show completely on YouTube here. We're going to be, as we said, discussing the 2025 winter transfer portal changes. We will be reviewing 20 quarterbacks, running backs, and receivers, along with 10 tight ends. We'll go into detail with 4 player spotlights at each position, except for the tight end position, where we'll spotlight 2 guys. All right, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's dive into some college fantasy football. You mentioned here, John, the transfer portal. It's become, and it's made college fantasy football like a 365-day event. And what's kind of funny, John mentioned here, we're recording on Friday. This is airing on the following Wednesday. And the Penn State Notre Dame game was last night. And my fiance even turned to me and she goes, normally, like, the championship game would be on January 9th, and we're still into the playoffs here. And I turned to her, I go, you have no idea how much stuff I've been tracking over the course of December with these transfer portal guys. And it really is. I mean, it's been nuts. And I'm kind of curious some of your initial feedback or insights of how the transfer portal's really been changing CFF. The biggest thing that I've noticed, because I'm also having to track all the coaching changes, and one of the biggest things, like, you're now seeing general managers in college football staffs. I find that amazing. Like what's some of the biggest impacts you've seen?
Well, the first, and my Huskies have an opinion on the transfer portal, so I apologize. Someone must be delivering something to the house. My mom lives with us. and we get a lot of Amazon stuff. So I apologize, everyone. The biggest thing is it is now like NFL free agency, and that is very fascinating. And I'm a big proponent of the transfer portal, and I'm almost 60, folks, but I'm not a curmudgeon who wants to be stuck in the old ways. If you understand college football and the way it had been run, it was clearly to the advantage of the coaches, the university, and the administration. The players had almost zero power whatsoever. And I apologize. Hey, I'm very, very sorry. I don't know what's going on out there. My wife's not home right now.
Hey, we're a husky-friendly podcast here. We're a husky-friendly podcast. It's fine.
Yes. We got 3 of them. I don't know what's going on right now. So the players didn't have any power. Now the players are able to, at least if they get stuck in a bad situation and now someone's at the door and I can't go get the door. If someone's in a bad situation, they can leave the program and they can find a better place. And that did not happen. I think back to like 15, 20 years ago. If a young man was 17 years of age and he makes a commitment to a program, he is literally stuck at that program for the next 4 years. I mean, of course, he could take a year off, but when you lose a year of eligibility, you think about it like how draconian that was, right? I'm 17, 18 years old. I sign up for a program to play football at a university. The coach leaves at the end of the first year, right? And I'm a dual threat quarterback, and they bring in a pro prospect offense, pro style, right? If I want to leave that program, I lose a year of eligibility of 4. That was really just awful. That doesn't exist anymore. This allows the players to go, and I understand there's a downside, right? Kids can just go. Hey, then that's opportunity. And coaches have to wake up and understand the new world that we live in. Now, from a college fantasy football prospect, we've always been system, at least the people that I play with, the people I'm around and who love this sport. Now we have to almost rely more on system than ever before. You were talking about tracking coaches. Mm-hmm. Hey, you better know these new offensive coordinators. What positions are they going to use the slot? Are they going to use the X? Are they going to look for a pass catching back? Are they going to do a grinder? What type of quarterback do they want? We really have to pay more attention than ever before. It's always been a factor. But I think now with the portal, you've got to understand the system in which the player is moving to more than ever before, because you have to ask yourself, does this young man's skill set, does it match the offense that they are moving to? And what was happening, and we also have to ask ourselves, why did it not work at the other program, right? What went wrong? Was it the staff? Was it the team around him? Was it the system? Was it the scheme? Is he too young? Right? We have so many questions and variables we have to answer for. I mean, Joe, maybe 12 years ago, let's say you Skip Holtz at Louisiana Tech. You knew his running backs were going to get a heavy workload. Now, so obviously some running backs were better than other running backs, but you could pretty much guess exactly what was going to happen. And it was pretty much, if you knew the league or the college football landscape, you could really project well. Now, offense coordinators aren't staying as long. Head coaches aren't necessarily there as long. So you've got to embrace the change and try to find value in the change.
Yeah, there's been so many ripple effects, I think, that the transfer portal has created. You're definitely hitting up on some. There's guys who it's really been great, the opportunities they've had, especially these group of 5 players that get to move up to the Power 4 and show like, hey, I am a real NFL prospect. Now you can see me against, some greater competition. I think that's definitely been helpful. Also, I mean, NIL plays into this, but we're not going to kind of comment too much on that.
I mean, I don't know enough because we don't
Yeah.
have like hardcore numbers. We have estimates, right? But I don't have facts. We just have rumors. We have people who think I know they're getting paid, but I don't have facts on how much.
And it goes hand in hand with what we're talking about here, and you're seeing, guys are now making quarterbacks. There's
Yes.
quarterbacks signed. They're making $4 million a year going into 2025. One little change I like to see, and I don't think it's going to happen, but kind of a hybrid between NFL free agency and what we have now in college, and to where a player can sign with a school, and in his NIL deal, they can do a multi-year contract sort of a thing. So you could get a player who could say, you know what, I want to commit to going to LSU for 2 years. You guys are going to commit this amount of money to me for 2 years, where that way that player can be like, hey, I got a chance to develop here. They're definitely going to, they're not going to sit me on the bench for 2 years if they're paying me this money. That gives us a little better idea, too, of just being able to kind of figure out more than just 1 year. And I mentioned the home league that I run that you're in. We're a keeper league. We're not a dynasty. And we only have 4 guys that we get to keep from year to year. But it makes it really hard. Like if you're in a dynasty
Exactly.
or a keeper, dynasty, I think is maybe a little bit different because you can think like NFL prospect line of thinking. But like a keeper league from 1 year to the next, it's like, hey, I grabbed this freshman because he was really good during the season, and then he can move to another program, and just now you're like, oh man, like he's not a good fit, or now he's in what I'm starting to observe at the Power 4 level. You're getting more spreading the workload, I think, especially at running back, is keeping guys healthy. We're at the Group of 5 level. One of the observations I've had is when a player really takes off, and especially like once conference play hits, and they found, okay, we've got a guy who's going to be good. They just feed that dude, and they squeeze every ounce of juice that they can out of that guy because they know he's gone next year. So that is one thing that's kind of difficult. Is like those Group of 4 teams, they're trying to find guys that couldn't hang at the Power 4 level. So trying to get those type of transfers. It's really hard getting a good idea on the type of just straight freshmen that are coming up. So a lot of these Group of 5 guys, I feel like you kind of are guessing a little bit going into the season, but it's more so observing, like we thought there might be a spot in the system that someone could break out, and then you kind of have to wait and see, oh, okay, here's this guy. He's hot. Let me get on him before he's gone next year. And then at that Power 4 level, it is kind of, like Damian Martinez at Miami's, I think, a great example. Here's a guy who we know can be a workhorse. He's exactly a dude that we love in fantasy. And what happened? He went over to Miami, and they're spreading the load. So that is some of the difficult thing too. Of you could see like, hey, here's the right guy. He's going to a right system, and then they just decide to spread the load. And I think we're still feeling out what schools want to do that. And I think the Missouri running back room is going to be a good one to watch this year. Are they going to go back to a bell cow back? Are they going to spread it around? I don't have an answer right now. I don't know about you.
Well, I'll say this. The results tell me they better find a bell cow back.
Yeah.
Because they were a heck of a lot better of a football team with the bell cow. But that's just my anecdotal from, comparing 2 seasons back to back. I think they had 2 underachieving backs. Neither one deserved to be a bell cow, but it definitely affected the offense. I mean, there were a lot of things that happened with the Missouri Tigers, but I can't look at one thing and say their running game fell apart.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like we go a year back from today, Missouri goes and they sign 2 guys from the Group of 5, both bigger name guys, and it's very interesting how now we're a year up, and all the comments you just made about Missouri. And hey, guess what? Similar situation is going to happen again here with Missouri, bringing up a Group of 5 guy, and so it's interesting. There's a lot of speculation that can happen with these players, and to kind of transition here into our first batch of players that we're going to talk about here. We've got some quarterback transfers. Just kind of going down the list here. We have Jackson Arnold. On the far right is their star category from when they were prospects out of high school. So you got Jackson Arnold, who was a 5-star. He went from Oklahoma over to Auburn. We got Robbie Ashford, a 4-star that went from South Carolina to Wake Forest. Thomas Castellanos, a 3-star that went from Boston College to Florida State. Ricky Collins, a 4-star backup from LSU that's transferring to Syracuse. Devin Dampier, a 3-star who went from New Mexico to Utah. DeQuan Finn, 3-star Baylor, and is going back to the MAC at Miami of Ohio. I'm excited about that one. Brandon Lewis, a 3-star who's going from Nevada to Memphis. John Mateer, the QB1 from this year, going from Washington State to Oklahoma. Fernando Mendoza, a 2-star going from California to Indiana. And Darian Mensah, another 2-star going from Tulane to Duke. We're going to do spotlight reviews on Jackson Arnold and Fernando Mendoza. John, what are your thoughts on the rest of these guys here that are on the board?
Well, I will say this. I think there's some interesting players. Just an early one of the players that I'm obviously very interested in. I like Brandon Lewis going to Memphis. I think he's very interesting, dual threat guy. We know how dynamic that Memphis system can be. I will say in general, the Memphis system hasn't highlighted dual threat runners. So that is going to be a challenge. I'm going to have to pay very close attention to spring ball and what do they tell us about Lewis at Memphis? If you've been a Memphis fan like myself, they produce so many good quarterbacks, but they tend to be pocket passers.
Yep.
So we'll see what happens there. Darian Mensah is fascinating. I really like his arm strength, and I like what he does with the deep ball. Really liked him at Tulane. How is he going to transfer to Duke? Will those kind of not lazy might be the wrong word, but he likes those big lollipop long throws, nice arm. He gets them in the right spot, good accuracy. But how is he going to do against those ACC secondaries? And what does the Duke wide receiver core look like? So those are two players that I'm thinking a lot about that I have to watch closely.
Yeah, Brandon Lewis is a guy that definitely caught my eye, and I'm like, I wonder how this going to be a square peg in a round hole. I don't know, or it could be magic, fantasy magic. That's definitely one that caught my eye. I mentioned DeQuan Finn going back to the MAC. Miami of Ohio has been one of the better teams, and we know their system. They can throw the ball around. I think that's going to be exciting for next year. Thomas Castellanos, I think with the system change that we have at Florida State, he might be overhyped. I don't know yet. It's still super early, but I can see a lot of people over-focusing on him. But this might be a perfect fit for him system-wise. So he's going to be an interesting one, I think, as well. You mentioned Mensah, that Duke offense, he's going to be able to really rip it. How well is he going to make? It's not that big of a move up, really, in my opinion, from Tulane to the ACC. I think that's definitely an interesting one there. And then Ricky Collins, the backup coming out of LSU to Syracuse, we know that's a really good system. And he's a guy who I definitely want to keep my eye out for him. And Robbie Ashford. These are two really good systems that these guys are going to. I want to really just see those spring reports, see how they're doing. I definitely think they're probably the favorites to win those jobs. But they don't have much of a proven track record on the field. So you can't really, you have to pencil them in. You can't write them with pen yet. All right. So let's start off our player spotlights with my pick, Jackson Arnold. We mentioned he's going from Oklahoma to Auburn. In 2024, he scored 175.1 fantasy points, threw the ball 246 attempts, 151 completions, right over 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He is a pretty good runner. He in limited play, he didn't play the whole year. 150 carries, over 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. I think he is capable of more on the ground than those stats show. How do you feel like Arnold fared in this the handful of games that he played this season?
Obviously, he wasn't overly impressive early. However, sometimes I think we forget as a community how young these young men are. He was a second-year player, a sophomore. It's hard to I'm starting to really not want to use these freshmen, sophomore, junior, because you have red shirts, you have all this other stuff. But he was a second-year player at Oklahoma. I don't think they had a very good offense. The running game disappeared. The wide receiver core was literally just decimated. I mean, didn't they lose like the top 5 receivers at the depth chart at one point. I mean, they were literally playing people who probably should not have been on the field.
Oh
We
yeah.
did get right.
Well, and not only that, they had some of their top guys that we were expecting to come back who just never even played this year.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean,
you
it
know,
was
that wide receiver core, like he did not get any help from them, and their O
no.
line was really poor, which is one reason why
Yeah.
the ground game stunk. And he's running for his life. I mean, I'm surprised he only threw 3 interceptions. Um, I don't think he did as bad as it looked. That offense, it was just the worst combination of things. Like we talked about, wide receivers that are all hurt. You know, you're playing guys that are really low on the depth chart. They can't create any separation against DBs. You're not getting any time in the pocket because your O line's bad. And you're not getting help from a running game. So, I'm going to say this. I think he played better than a lot of people might want to give him credit for because of all these holes around him.
And this is something that I've always said. Its expectations are too high too early.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does tell me is there's probably going to be a little bit of a buying period that we might get a better deal on Jackson Arnold. I'm a believer in Hugh Freeze. This Auburn offense, I like their wide receivers. They were young at the end of the year. They started the pop. So I'm going to believe it. And here's something that I was stunned by, my friend. If you look, he had now 6-point passing touchdown leagues. He had 3 games with over 30 points, Joe. He wasn't as bad as people expected, and he's a dual threat. So the ceiling is really high with Jackson Arnold. So I like him to bounce back this year.
John, your audio's coming through fine. Your video is frozen on me.
Let me reset it let me see if I can do something.
Yeah, we'll try that here real quick.
Here
I
we go.
apologize, guys, for the there we
All
go.
right, here we go.
The quick technical difficulties there, but everything you said came through fine. There was no interruption in the audio. Just kind of going back here, now switching over to like looking at the position battle that Arnold's going to be walking into, and I think a lot of people are going to pencil Arnold in as just he's going to be the starter. But I'll tell you what, they brought in Ashton Daniels from Stanford, and I think this is going to be a tough position battle that I think will go into the second half of fall camp. I do not like Ashton Daniels is good. He's got a lot of the same skill set Jackson Arnold has. You put both of these guys are pretty good fits in this system. We've got other guys like John Colvin, Jackson Barkley on here, Deuce Knight, a freshman who probably is better than the other backups. But I think Ashton Daniels is going to put up one hell of a fight. And I'm just going to kind of recommend if anybody's doing drafts early, like really before even fall camp, you might need to handcuff these 2 guys if you want to draft this spot. Because I do think, I don't know about you. I think Ashton Daniels has as equal of a opportunity to win this job as Jackson Arnold does, which is part of why I wanted to put the highlight on Arnold here, because I don't think enough people are going to be thinking about how much competition Daniels is going to bring in to this battle. What are your insights?
I do think Ashton Daniels has talent, but he really disappointed me last year. And I think Daniels only has 1 year of eligibility remaining, if my memory serves me. So I do think if you're looking for Jackson Arnold as a 2-year window, maybe a 3-year window, I do think you have to give deference to Jackson Arnold as a coaching staff, because I do think you have to consider for now on that if you're not giving these young stars the opportunity to play early, they will hit the transfer portal on you. My insight is I think they brought in Ashton Daniels for emergency situation. Look, injuries happen all the time, right? So if Jackson Arnold goes down, Ashton Daniels can step in and hopefully the offense won't fall apart. So I think it's more of that than he would actually. I would be shocked. He'd have to really outplay him to get that, because I have a feeling Jackson Arnold is there for 2 years in Hugh Freeze's mind.
I agree with you on those points. The one thing that why I'm anticipating this might be a tougher battle is if you're Ashton Daniels, who's you can go play somewhere, and instead you go to a school where they say, "Come be our backup." Something tells me they had a different message for him. So I'm just, it's one of those, I'm curious, which is the whole reason I wanted to bring this spotlight up. Is I think this is going to be a really interesting. We very rarely see two quarterbacks who are in the same general talent level brought into one school in one transfer portal. So I definitely think it's going to be interesting to watch. But I'm like you. If I had to put my money down right now, who do I think is going to win the job? It's probably going to be Jackson Arnold. And we're talking about Hugh Freeze here. Taking a little look into his system. He's a head coach over at Auburn. Got a graphic on the screen for you guys of all the quarterback ones that he's had going back to 2019. I do not include the 2020 season stats just because that year was so wonky. But this is my historical database that I keep on guys. We've got 2 years at Auburn and 3 years at Liberty in this sample size. His QB1's average 248.1 fantasy points in a 4 passing touchdown format. That number is definitely inflated by Malik Williams at Liberty in 2021. He scored, nearly 395 fantasy points, ran for almost 900 yards, 13 touchdowns. We have not seen, nearly any type of running numbers. I mean, the most rushing touchdowns over the last 3 years has been, 3 from his quarterbacks. I do think either one of these guys, Arnold or Daniels, I think they like there's a decent possibility they can hit 5. I don't know if I want to bank on 6, 7, 8 rushing touchdowns, but I think 5 rushing touchdowns is a legitimate number, and I haven't even begun to go into projections yet. But I do. That's one thing I think I see interesting is I think we could definitely see a bump up, 600 rushing yards, 5.
Oh, easy.
5 rushing touchdowns. And I like to keep my expectations grounded when you look at some of this, because there's some guys who like to go overboard on the rushing stats when they do projections, and I try not to do that where you're in love with a name, so you want to bump that up versus what do the old numbers say, like what we have on the screen here. But the last 2 years at Auburn, it's been the best average for rushing attempts with 112 and 134, outside of leaving Malik Willis out of it. Do you agree with me? Does he bring more rushing potential to the table in 2025 for Hugh Freeze?
Oh, without question.
Yeah. All right, let's move over to your spotlight player, which is Fernando Mendoza. He's gone from Cal to Indiana, right down the road. I live in the northern part of Indianapolis, so Bloomington, Indiana is just an hour and a half away from me. And in 2024, he put up 238.2 fantasy points. And I actually think he was a guy who was capable of more stats. One thing to keep in mind when we're talking about his stats and everything, he did this in an offense where they fired the offensive coordinator at the end of the year. And I think that's something to keep in mind, that he was playing this well in an offense that produced at such a low level that they got rid of the guy. But he threw the ball 386 times for over 3,000 yards, 16 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. And I don't think, the 88 carries for 100 yards, there were a lot of sacks that this Cal offense had to deal with, but he's actually pretty slippery. I think he's a pretty decent runner, and we'll comment on that a little later here. But what was your take for how Mendoza's 2024 season went?
If you probably weren't watching Cal late in the season, you may not have noticed that Fernando Mendoza played very good football over the last month. Look at his fantasy production in the last 4 games. 33.4, 14.9, okay, not awful, but not, but then 38.5 and 36.5. I thought the Cal offense played very well down the stretch. Yep. He's coming to a much more prolific offense. I'm a believer in Cignetti. He's shown me enough. Forget about the playoff game. And I know people didn't like the personality and all that. Whatever. It is what it is. He's won football games wherever he's been. He has made, chicken salad out of pretty bad chicken. He's done very well. And he's bringing in Fernando Mendoza. And my what I also look at is I trust the coach. Signetti and his staff obviously watched film. They obviously broke down things that they liked in his skill set. I will trust the coach to make this analysis and decide that this is my guy and he can succeed in my offense. Now, there are no guarantees. I've seen players who I like go to systems they don't. But if I'm going to bet on a player and a coach and a scheme, I think this is a pretty good match.
I agree with you. And you're going to be able to get multiple years out of Mendoza.
Yes.
And this is kind of a unique situation. So, I've got position battle guys here. And if you look down on the bottom, Alberto Mendoza, that is his brother. So big part of how IU got him too is and why I think they'll probably keep him is, you got a family connection there. The biggest competition he has in my eyes is Grant Wilson. He transferred over from Old Dominion. So, and Signetti's a guy who he says, I want to bank more on proven production versus potential. So that's part of what makes me think Grant Wilson's the most likely guy who will challenge. But I mean, to me, I don't think it's going to be much of a challenge. Do you agree with me? Do you think this is going to be a slam dunk for Fernando to win this job?
I would be absolutely shocked if Fernando does not win the job. I mean, anything's possible. We're old enough to know that anything can happen. But if you're looking at that depth chart and what the players have accomplished and the system, yeah, I think he clearly wins this battle.
I agree with you. And it's kind of exciting. I'm bringing up Mike Shanahan for the coaching system spotlight just because, I mean, him and Signetti have been at the hip. So and I haven't been able to get a pin on exactly who does the play calling, but you could pull up either person's name. The history is the same for what I have in my database, and we've got 1 year at Indiana, 2 years at James Madison, going back to 2022. The career average for the QB1 in the system is 311.8 fantasy points, which is pretty nice. The best year was Jordan McLeod in 2023 at James Madison. He had almost 380 fantasy points. He passed the ball over 400 times for 35 touchdowns, which is a big bump up from what we've seen in the other years in this offense. But the one thing that catches my eye, and I mentioned earlier, Mendoza, I think, is a pretty good runner. His stats, it's hidden because he got sacked so much last year, but look over on the far right at the rushing, and last year's the only year in this system where the quarterback had less than 90 rushing attempts. So, you don't have huge yards there, about 300, 400 rushing yards, from the James Madison time period, but you're getting 7-8 rushing touchdowns out of that. I'm right there with you. Mendoza is very intriguing in this offense, and Curtis Rourke is just a guy, he had knee injuries. You don't want to risk running him if you're Indiana last year. Mendoza, I think they might let him off the chain a little bit. And would you agree that he's definitely more versatile? We might see a similar trend to these 2022, 2023 rushing numbers?
Oh, I think they should go up. I mean, if my memory serves, didn't Rourke have some injuries to his legs also when he was at Miami?
At Ohio. Ohio.
What?
He was at Ohio.
Ohio, sorry.
Yep.
So I definitely think that they if he's healthy, Mendoza, which I don't think I've ever read that he's not healthy. So yes, I think maybe getting 90 to 100 carries in a positive game situation, right? Instead of getting sacked, I think that'll help.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's transition over to our second batch of quarterback transfers. We've got Chandler Morris from North Texas to Virginia. We have got Miller Moss from USC to Louisville. I'm going to mispronounce a couple of these names, folks, so hang in there. Bo Pribella from Penn State to Missouri. J.K. There's no great way to do it. Oh, God. JKS. I'm going JKS. A signee who signed in at Oregon and left to go to Cal so he could be a freshman starter. He's going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on. Caden Salter from Liberty to Colorado. Malachi Singleton from Arkansas to Purdue. Ethan Vasco from Coastal Carolina to Liberty, Caden Beltcamp from Western Kentucky to Florida Atlantic, Connor Wigman from Texas A&M to Houston, and Nate Yarnell from Pitt to Texas State. We're going to be doing player spotlights on Miller Moss and Caden Salter. John, what do you find interesting from the rest of these guys?
One, Connor Wegman, who is going down. Well, actually, University of Houston's now in the Big 12, right? I have to make sure I get
Mhm.
this. So I guess it's more of a horizontal than a vertical. I'm sorry, I'm old. I think of Houston more as a G5, everyone, but they are technically in the P4. But if Wegman can stay healthy, I think it's just about health, right? He just can't stay on the field. I do think that the talent is there, but is he going to be on the field? That's going to be the key in my book on him. And I do think Chandler Morris, he's moving back up. What an interesting career he has, right? TCU to North Texas. Now he's moving back up to the Power Four with Virginia. I think he's going to be very interesting to read reports about him in the spring.
Yeah. And it's going to be an interesting one there. And I'm not sure quite yet. I want to sink my teeth in the numbers before I'm going to say how much I like that move. But I definitely had my eye on that one. Malachi Singleton to Purdue in this go offense. That's an exciting one I want to look for because he is a perfect fit for that system. Another guy who's a perfect fit for the system he's going to is Caden Beltcamp. I think the biggest question for him is going to be, can they find some receivers who can get separation and make some plays? But Beltcamp's a guy that definitely catches my eye. And, Texas State is an offense to always keep your eye out for. And Yarnell, I'm curious to see if he's going to be a good fit there. I'm not quite sure yet, but that's one guy that's definitely caught my eye as well. And, going into our spotlights here, let's start off with one of your picks, Caden Salter. In 2024, at Liberty, he put up 235 fantasy points. The passing, he was a little more passing than rushing in terms of where his workload came from. But I mean, the passing numbers aren't great. Almost
Oh,
1,900 yards, 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Rushing wise, he has great rushing ability, but those stats really went down this year to 587 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns. The passing production really took a major hit. And in 2023, instead of 1,886 yards, he threw for almost 1,000 more yards last year and doubled the touchdowns. How big of an impact do you think Salter's production took due to losing CJ Daniels in the transfer portal?
obviously, he took a much better one. I did not expect CJ Daniels to make that much of a difference in the offense. And Caden Salter burned, I'm just going to be honest, burned a few of my CFF rosters and
Mm-hmm.
best ball rosters. I thought I was so happy with the fourth or fifth pick getting Caden Salter. Boy, that didn't work. Now, this is the eyeball test. I thought he looked terrible throwing the football. Liberty was on TV a lot late in the year,
Mm-hmm.
at least on the East Coast. So they had a lot of those Thursday night games, if my memory serves me well. And Joe, I can't tell you how many times I literally just left shaking my head. Like, what is he doing? Like, just I thought really poor throws and decisions. And here's where the stats back up what my eyeball saw. He went from 61% completion to 56% completion. In college football, 5% is a lot. I mean, that's a significant number of first downs every game. And look at his fantasy points. 488 to 266. Woo!
Yeah.
Now, before I make a decision on Salter, I got to see how much Colorado, what the offensive line looks like coming back. What other that wide receiver core is decimated this year. They have a lot of players leaving. I think their top three receivers are all leaving the program. I'm going to be open-minded on Salter. I'm still going to focus on his ceiling, but I'm not going to reach for him. He's got to be a bargain,
Mm-hmm.
like a value in a draft right now, because there's too many question marks having to move over to Colorado.
I agree with you. And you mentioned his throwing ability.
Woo!
He struggled against better group of five pass defenses.
He
And
did.
so when I look at this position battle, we've got Ryan Staub, Colton Allen, Dominique Ponder, Julia Lewis. Like, there's not a ton of names on here that from a star potential you'd think could challenge him. But the fact that you have a system where they throw the ball around a bunch, that they're not a dual threat quarterback running system. So I do think this position battle might be more open than some people think, just because any one of these guys on the screen, just if they just mentally get the offense, and that's going to give them a leg up, and they can make throws and read us, secondaries better than Salter. I think it's one of those things of like you said, looking at Salter as a bargain. I agree with you. He probably should be the guy to get it, but I would not be surprised if any one of these guys maybe creates a big push for the QB1 job just because of how tough he struggled with, throwing the ball. And when we kind of look into the offensive system, like I said, we only have 1 year to look at here with Pat Shurmur. And also, let's be honest, I'm not sure. I believe that Dion is leaving Colorado, and like maybe it's by NFL draft we find out, but like that was my assumption, is that he's gonna just follow his kids to the NFL, and he's gonna be the dad who shows up at practice every day, standing on the fence. But with just a 1 year sample size, like I said, there were 91 rushing attempts by Shedeur Sanders last year, but negative 16 yards. It's him running for his life. It's not running split zones or option reads, things like that. So that's the real interesting thing with this offense of you have a really high pass attempt ceiling, high volume. Can Salter put it together and actually, really fit in? And especially like you said, wide receiver room's pretty empty. O-line should still be a mess. What's your first impression of Salter's 2025 CFF value outside of, like you said, maybe wait on him in drafts? Like, how well do you think he might fit into this system?
I'm not a big Pat Shurmur guy. I don't like the pieces around him. I think he could excel, but I don't have a definitive answer at this point because
Mhm.
there's too many variables that we don't know. What receivers are going to be on here when we get there? I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, and I'm like you. Early drafts, I might wait until spring practice is done, but like early on, I'm just gonna ignore Salter. I do that with certain players. If I just don't like the risk, I just put them on my do not draft list and let somebody else burn a draft pick, and I'll get somebody else I want. Uh, Now one guy, and as we get into this, I'm gonna put some question marks on whether or not you want my pick, Miller Moss, going from USC to Louisville. Last year, he started for USC, but then eventually got benched with only 188 fantasy points, 362 pass attempts for 2,555 yards, 18 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He's not really a running back, running type of quarterback here, but he came in with high hopes with USC because of the great bowl game he had against, of all teams, Louisville in 2023. But he just couldn't hang on to his job, benched after 9 games. How much do you think maybe Moss's shortcomings in 2024 were due to him, or do you think it might be due to the USC offense as a whole?
I think it's the UC offense as a whole. And I know he didn't look, if you look at it from 9,000 feet, his numbers might not overly impress you. And I think he left with 3 games remaining.
Mm-hmm.
So those numbers you have to base them. Let's see, how many games did he play for them? If I got it here. He played 9 games. So the numbers in 9 games maybe aren't as bad as you thought if you're thinking 11 or 12. I love him in best ball in this Louisville system. If you look at at his game logs here, he had 3 games over 30 points. And if I don't have to predict when he's going to go off in this Louisville system, I'm really okay with that. I think there's value here. He wasn't your typical Lincoln Riley quarterback. He didn't dazzle you with what we're used to numbers in the Lincoln Riley system. But I think moving on over to the Cardinals here, I think this is going to be a decent opportunity for the young man to bounce back. The limit is he doesn't have the rushing upside, right? You're just not going to get the 70 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. So his ceiling is capped. But you know what? In that Louisville system, he could throw 4 or 5 touchdowns any week. So I do like him in best ball very much early on.
Oh yeah, and I'm going to kind of keep the tempo up a little bit because we do have quite a few guys to cover here. But the position battle, I'm not going to go too deep into this one. I mean, in my eyes, it looks like he has the overall talent and experience edge over every one of these guys, Allen, Adams, and Mims. I definitely think he's got the opportunity that he should be able to step in and win this one. I don't think I don't even think Brady Allen can really kind of keep up with him in spring to try and keep a position battle going into fall camp. And you were kind of mentioning the Louisville offense. We have Jeff Brom, the head coach. We got 2 years from Louisville, 4 years from Purdue in this sample size going back to 2018. The career average for QB1s in this system, and everybody likes to talk about Jeff Brom quarterbacks, only puts up 231, just under 232 fantasy points. So there's one thing I kind of like to throw out here. Best ball, I can agree with you on. I think he's a good best ball pick. But if you're having to pick lineups and stuff, I kind of look at these numbers and I pose an interesting question. Is the idea of a Jeff Brom quarterback no longer relevant? None of these guys on this, Tyler Show, Plummer, Aiden O'Connell, none of these guys have hit 300 fantasy points. 2018 at Purdue is the closest we got, just under 300 fantasy points in a passing touchdown system. But none of these guys have done it, and none of these guys, you don't have the rushing opportunity upside like you mentioned. And also, since you can't rely on the running game, look at the total touchdowns of all these quarterbacks. No guy's ever thrown for 30 touchdowns in a year. So part of the reason I wanted to highlight Miller Moss is I do think he could be a good best ball guy. So I'm wanting to bring up a lot of devil's advocate things to you guys, on today's show, just to think about the other side of things. Because there's going to be a lot of people that want to tell you how great he is, but I'm kind of looking at this system. And would you agree with me? Like I said, no guys hit 300 points. No guys hit 30 passing touchdowns, and there's no rushing opportunities. So is that such a crazy question to say, is the idea of a Jeff Brom quarterback no longer relevant? I don't think it is. What about you?
Well, I can't say it's no longer relevant because Tyler Shook. I was not a Tyler Shook guy. I don't think I drafted him in one. Oh my God. Between all my best balls season longs, I didn't have one Tyler Shook. But in DFS and looking at the matchups, I will say at the end of the year, Tyler Shook had a decent year from fantasy. However, you are absolutely right. Jeff Brom's system does not use the dual threat quarterback. So our ceiling is limited, but in the right matchups, Jeff Brom's quarterbacks will be pretty good. But I do think they'll be up and down.
Yeah. And my big prediction for this draft season, I think that Miller Moss is going to be overdrafted. He's going to be picked too early compared to the other quarterbacks that are available because of that Brom system. All right, transitioning over to running backs. We've got Fluff Bothwell. I always want to say Buff Bagwell. My boy here. All of you wrestling fans, you'll get that one, Buffs the stuff. But Fluff Bothwell from South Alabama to Mississippi State. CJ Campbell, Florida Atlantic to Rutgers. Anderson Castle from Appalachian State to Duke. Dean Connors from Rice to Houston. CJ Donaldson from West Virginia to Ohio State. Dante Dowell from Nebraska to Kentucky. We got Rashul Faison from Utah State to South Carolina. Ahmad Hardy from Louisiana Monroe to Missouri. Justice Haynes, Alabama to Michigan. And Roman Hemby, Maryland to Indiana. We're going to do our spotlight review on CJ Campbell and Justice Haynes. What guys stand out to you from the rest of these players?
Can I just say I'm really disappointed in some of these landing spots?
Yeah.
I mean, we had G4 players like Fluff Bothwell, Dean Connors, and Ahmad Hardy, who we love this year.
Mm-hmm.
They were so good. And to see them move up, I mean, Bothwell at Mississippi State in the SEC. I mean, I might not have a share of him unless I hear reports that are glowing, and I'm talking like glowing. I'm probably not going to have him moving up that level of competition.
And with
Ahmad Hardy, what?
and with Mississippi State, their starting running back is back.
Yeah, I mean, and they're not that good of a team. Like, it's just, oh my God. Ahmad Hardy, he won our CFF Freshman of the Year award. We just talked about Missouri. Are they going to do a committee? Are they going to give him? He's a little undersized, moving up to the SEC. That just does not bode very well. And Dean Connors was just a pass catching stud at Rice. I mean, he was the Rice offense. Is he just a depth piece now for the University of Houston? Now, if I had a bank on one to get more workload, I think Dean Connors might be at the top because he might have the best potential to get that 200 touches. But it is not, these are not great landing spots other than the two that we're going to highlight.
Well, there's one guy I really liked, Hemby to Indiana. We know
but
they're going to rotate some guys, but
that's the problem.
But I think he might be one of those guys. You mentioned DFS, finding a guy with some good, price value. I do like that landing spot for him for being productive. I once again, I doubt he's going to be a workhorse. In the keeper league that you're in, that I run, I had Hardy last year. I was all over Louisiana Monroe running game. And I hate to say it, but because of how young he is, I think I'm going to have to make him one of my 4 keepers because I want to have running backs. I want guys who have a potential and have a guy who I can keep having year after year. Like I've just like you, like I feel obligated to keep him versus I'm excited to keep him. There's a big difference there. And depending on what happens at Ohio State, this CJ Donaldson landing spot, he could be the number 1 guy next year. It all depends. But I think that's going to be, that one intrigued me when I saw him over at Ohio State. That one definitely intrigued me. And, we all want to see a bell cow back at Kentucky. So Dowdell going over to Kentucky, that's another one that intrigued me and grabbed my eye. But, going over to our spotlights, the guy I wanted to talk about, and this is another one of these kind of devil's advocate, kind of looking at different aspects of the situation. I want to talk about CJ Campbell going from Florida Atlantic to Rutgers. And, in last year, he did 236 fantasy points. He ran for almost 850 yards, 11 touchdowns. But what really made him stand out, he had 40 receptions on 51 targets, almost 475 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. And he almost had more rushing yards and touchdowns than all other Florida Atlantic running backs combined. So his PPR value, the threat of him out of the backfield catching the ball was key to his fantasy value. I thought Campbell was pretty special in this offense last year. What's your take on how he did?
Oh, I love CJ Campbell in this offense last year. In 3 of the last 5 games, Joe, he went over 30 points. And the other 2, he was 26 and 16 fantasy points. It was the pass catching upside, and he was so explosive. I actually saw him live against UConn in West Hartford, and he was good in that game. Not great, but he was good. He scored 19.9 fantasy points. He was perfect for this Owls offense. Now he moves to the Big Ten. And I don't like this because when have we ever seen the Rutgers back under Schiano catch passes?
Yep.
is he even going to get 25 receptions in the Schiano offense? And that's where his explosive fantasy value was. Hey, if he grinds the ball with 220 carries, okay, but he might not have that ceiling that he did, because I think he had a couple long home runs, if my memory serves me, like, touchdowns beyond 50 yards. I don't think he gets that at Rutgers.
And we'll definitely jump into that system part. And I agree with you 100%. But like this position battle, I find it pretty interesting. We got Antoine Raymond, Sam Brown, Jashawn Benjamin, Gabe Winocek, Terrell Mitchell. Sam Brown started the season as the rock solid RB2. I mean, like he was a guy in our in that keeper league. I had Sam Brown sitting on my bench thinking, all right, he's going to be my guy. You know, I'm going to make him a keeper for next year. He goes down with a leg injury. Antoine Raymond steps up, finishes 2024 strong. In the bowl game against Kansas State, 113 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. So you've got 2 guys who already, I think, could legitimately win this job. You're adding one more piece in here. You know, can one of these guys become the bell cow, or does this potentially become a committee? I mean,
it smells committee all over.
Exactly, and that's my thought. If I had to take a guess today, my guess is Raymond wins the job outright and becomes a bell cow, or if he can't pull away with this one, then it becomes a committee situation. And going into their past stats, you've never really seen the closest thing to a committee breakdown that you get from their offensive coordinator here with 2 years at Rutgers and 3 years at Minnesota would be 2018 at Minnesota. Their RB1 had 202 rushing attempts. Their RB2 had 117. That's the closest that you can look at for kind of committee stats. But most of the time, like he wants to kind of, it seems like that 240 to 250 carry range is what he kind of likes. I think we have to ignore the 320 carries from Minnesota in 2022. But if a guy can win out, that's definitely the way to go. But like you said, look at these numbers on the right in the receiving area. The most targets that we've ever seen out of this offensive system were the last 2 years. 19 targets and 15.
That's not good.
No. And so, you know, thinking about Campbell here, it does take his greatest asset that makes him stand away from this pack, and it takes it off the field. And so that really is, it's interesting, but at the same time too, maybe they just haven't had a guy. They are running more of a spread offense. I've watched him a little bit. They're not looking like the old Rutgers, you know, from the Big East days. So that's another thing that does intrigue me about him. And we'll have to see any reports from the spring, but like he might be the third down back that they're tossing the ball to, you know, or a second and long third down back. But, you know, my big takeaway, I don't see him being the bell cow. And really the part of the reason I wanted to highlight him in the player spotlight is to talk about all these other guys as well and what this Rutgers system is, because typically you want to target this offense, but I think it's a lot riskier. Like I said, if I was taking a shot in a best ball draft, I would take a shot maybe in the mid rounds on Raymond if he's still there. But you know, you're like the middle portion of a draft, or I'm just probably going to skip this. But a guy like CJ though, he may not be bad. 28th, 29th, 30th round pick to just take a shot on, you know, like draft late, drop early sort of a guy. You know, what's your read on him in the offense, or just as a whole, how you think it's probably going to shake out for 2025?
I don't think he becomes the lead guy. I think this is a depth piece. If they do want to spread it out, maybe he becomes their pass catching back. I'm probably going to stay out of this Rutgers offensive backfield for now, unless I get confirmation that one of these young men are going to get the 220 carries, then I can be interested in them. But we've been very lucky the last 2 years, you know, with Mongai back there. He's been very good. So I'm going to probably stay away unless I get some really absurd value. And maybe in a bet, like we play in those 33-round best ball draft leagues, I could see double dipping with 2 Rutgers running backs late, like CJ Campbell and maybe Sam Brown, very late, right? Like, and maybe in a best ball when I don't have to predict who's going off. But I just don't see myself in a regular 20-team draft right now when we can cut players. I'm probably not that interested.
One guy I know you are interested in is your pick here. We got Justice Haynes coming from Alabama over to Michigan. I mean, hands down, the biggest splash of running back transfers. And at this last season at Alabama, you know, he's in a split carry situation. He only put up about 115 fantasy points, about 450 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns, a little bit of receiving, but not too much. It's one of these things where, he was getting about 2/3 the amount of the carries that Jam Miller was getting, even though a lot of people consider Haynes the more talented of the two backs. I think my big takeaway on this was it a mistake by Alabama to not make him the RB1 and keep him around to where now we see a landing spot like this? I think that was a huge mistake.
I think it was a mistake too, and I'm shocked. I did not. I'm a Michigan guy. That's kind of why Joe. I got season tickets to UConn. I love the Huskies, but that's just they're not like a college. They're just my fun. I love to
Mhm.
go to see college. I'll watch any football. Michigan's the team I grew up with loving, and the land Justice Haynes. And we've been talking about system, system, system. We know exactly what Michigan wants to do. They want to put the ball in the belly of the beast. If you just think that Khalil Mullins, right, if he's the floor of your lead back and Blake Corum of 2023 is the ceiling of your lead back, then Justice Haynes falls very comfortably in the middle with 225 to 250 carries. Now, that depth chart is pretty good. Michigan does have talent there. So there is going to be a competition for him. Isn't Jordan Marshall was the kid in the bowl game against Alabama, right?
I
I
think
think he
so.
had over 100 yards in that game. He looked pretty good. So I'm going to watch the spring reports. I do think Haynes is the best player. And Joe, how do you protect Bryce Underwood? You run the ball,
Football.
you run the ball, you run the ball, you run the ball. Michigan was already going to run the ball. Then you bring in a freshman quarterback, uber talented, but he's not, you can't put the ball and expect him to throw it 350 to 400 times. It's just not going to work. So what do? You give Justice Haynes 250 carries if he's the lead guy. Love this spot for him.
Yeah, Marshall definitely, I think, can put up some competition here. Hall,
Oh, yeah.
Hall's got a lot of experience, a lot more than the rest of the group, with some game experience. But like those two guys, I think would be the next best guys that could kind of compete. But if I had to bet my money, I would say by the end of spring camp, Haynes may not be named the starter, but it's pretty much understood he's going to be the bell cow. I doubt one of these guys will push Haynes going into fall camp. And you mentioned running the ball. Looking at the system, I decided to actually pull up Chip Lindsey, their brand new offensive coordinator this season. And in this spread, you got 2 years at UNC, 1 year at UCF and Auburn, 2 years at Troy. But what we saw from North Carolina last year is he will feed a feature back. I think it's going to be interesting. Are we going to see a whole lot of multiple tight end, like 22 personnel sets, 13 personnel sets out of Michigan like we have been? Or will Chip actually kind of do more, like they spread out a little more in North Carolina while they're hammering the ball on the ground? How exactly is that going to shake out? I think it's going to be interesting. I think we'll have to just see where the talent is there. But I do like this. I mean, Chip's running back one averages about 213 fantasy points, but you can see 2024 and 2023 in North Carolina, there's a huge jump up. And I think that that North Carolina is a perfect comparison because Haynes will be the most talented player in that offense. The offense lacks a complementary passing game, like you said. So I kind of think it's not a bad expectation to use the Omari and Hampton numbers to set your foundation for how he could do this year. Do you see a different take? Do you think maybe they might stay more of the heavier personnel and pound it down, or do you think that these Hampton numbers could probably hold up?
I don't think they're going to spread it out. They don't have the wide receivers. I mean, I haven't. It's been bad at Michigan for the last couple of years at wide receiver. I don't other than Roman Wilson, they've had literally nothing. Colston Loveland is going to the NFL, so I don't. They're not even bringing back their number one pass catcher. And everything that the Sherrard has shown me, he's going to run the ball, run the ball. Yes, maybe they dabble early. Maybe they want to open it up against the lower level competition the first month. But I think once they get into the heart of the Big Ten schedule, they're just going to pound the football.
Then the one thing that might get added this year is QB run into the mix, zone reads, things of that nature too. Because what's easy for a young quarterback? Tuck the
Zone
ball and
read.
run. So
Yes.
that I do think that system is going to be pretty interesting to keep an eye on. Getting to our second batch of running backs here, we've got Mekhi Hughes going from Tulane to Oregon. Uh, by the way, this one was just announced, I think, a day ago before we started filming. It's going to be last week for you guys watching. We didn't have the time to include him. If I wanted to switch out and make him a spotlight player, but this was a jackpot land. Probably my second favorite landing spot here of Hughes going to Oregon. Continuing to go down the list, we've got Joyner going from USC to Texas Tech. We got Ishmael Mahdi going from Texas State to Arizona. We got Mobley going from Florida Atlantic to Tulane. Durell Robinson from UConn to Auburn. Eli Sanders from New Mexico to USC. Teron Stewart from Bowling Green to Virginia Tech. Chip Trayanum, I can never say his name right, taking a step down from Kentucky to Toledo. Kanye Udoh from Army to Arizona State, and Christian Washington, Coastal Carolina to San Diego State. We're going to do our spotlight reviews on Robinson and Udoh. Besides those spotlight players, who excites you from this list?
Well, I just learned about Mekhi Hughes, so I think he's the one you got to salivate for. There's no question that Oregon system is just gold. Mekhi Hughes has been absolutely tremendous at Tulane, so he's the guy I'm going to be most fascinated in. But Ishmael Mahdi moving to Arizona, I think that could be very interesting. But are they going to rotate? And the other player I like a lot is Eli Sanders moving to USC. You can say what you want about Lincoln Riley, but kind of under the radar, his running backs at USC have been pretty good from a fantasy purpose. So if he targeted Eli Sanders coming out of New Mexico, I think he knows what he's looking for in his running backs. Marshawn Lloyd and then Woody Marks this year were both very productive, and Lincoln Riley bought him in. So I loved Eli Sanders on the stretch. He was great late in the season for New Mexico. So those are the two that I'm very interested in.
Guys that I'm pretty excited about. Now, I know Quentin Joyner going to Texas Tech. I will probably get a lot of shares of him this season. I think he'll be a bell cow there, no problem. Teron Stewart, things that you can always bank on: death, taxes, and Stewart not making it through a full season healthy.
He won't.
I think Virginia Tech's going to probably be a committee situation. Chip going down to Toledo intrigues me. He's one of those guys we keep wanting to see him put it together, but I definitely will probably take some stabs at him. Maybe not too early, but one guy I do really like, and if he can command the carry workload, Christian Washington going to San Diego State. I think that might be one of my favorite sleeper players. Just surface level, as I've been seeing some of this. If he can get that command, that heavy workload, he definitely does excite me. And the guy that you picked out here that you wanted to go over was Durell Robinson. In 2024, put up a modest 133 fantasy points, only 100 carries for 731 yards and 8 touchdowns. Just a little bit of production in the air, not too much, but he was splitting carries almost evenly with Cam Edwards.
No, they had 3 backs. Mel Brown. He had a lot of carries.
Who do you think was the better back between all 3 of those guys? Like, do you think there was one that really stood out more, or do you think it was a committee for a reason?
No, I think Durell Robinson was the best. He was the freshman, and I think Mora, it seemed like the offense was reluctant to play him early in the season. But then he had this big game against Merrimack, and then he just kept exploding. I mean, he was very up and down. 19 fantasy points, 2 fantasy points, 14, 8, 19, 6, then 7, 27, all over the place. But I'll tell you this, when he gets in space, Joe, he's dangerous. Now, I don't love this landing spot. I do like Hugh Freeze. I think the system's right. I don't know if Durell Robinson is ready for the jump from an independent, let's just say it, a G5 program to the SEC level of competition. Now, I saw power and speed, but the level competition is nothing like what they're going to experience in the SEC.
I,
I'll say this, though.
I agree.
If it isn't, and if but I will say, Hugh Freeze picked him out and signed him. I would assume. I mean, I would assume, right? That means Hugh Freeze saw something in this young man. And look at the depth chart that you just put up there, my friend. That is not. Yes, they're all 4 stars, but I think he has a chance here to battle these guys. I can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting here. You got Alston and Cobb, who are two pretty talented 4-star guys. But what I noticed, Alston's played in 34 total games. Cobb has played in 25 total games. Robinson has played in 17 games, but he has the more meaningful game appearances, in my opinion. But I think it's going to be interesting. I I don't. I'm just not sure yet how I want to read this. The one thing that I think my takeaway when I look at the depth chart and the position battle is I'm not going to assume he's penciled in as the RB1. I think there's a
No, I
good
don't think
chance.
he's.
Yeah, I mean he could be the RB2. In
And
this,
he has to fight for it.
yeah, and definitely he's really going to have to fight, and that's part of the reason why with these the system spotlights here is like I'm putting the running back 2 in there as well, so you guys can get a look. Like if we're talking about like, hey, this guy could be the running back 1 or running back 2, you can see those numbers, and that might make you feel like, okay, I'm definitely going to wait until round 25 or later if I want to take a shot or let someone else take on the risk. If he could jump from, here with Hugh Freeze's system, he could go from 164 fantasy points to 90, depending on, where he lands. But the one thing I do see, though, at Auburn, the last 2 years, that running back 2 has not hardly had any fantasy production. And I think we might see a situation more like Hugh Freeze's time at Liberty. And it sounds to me like you're kind of agreeing with that. There might not be one breakout guy here in this Auburn offense. So, this might be a situation like the numbers that you're seeing from the 3 seasons at Liberty from 2022 to 2019.
Yeah, I don't think we have a Jarquez Hunter right now. I mean, and Jarquez Hunter, if you weren't watching Auburn, folks, he had a pretty good year for Auburn here. And I've been studying him for NFL prospect. I'm kind of into Jarquez Hunter. I think he was underused but that's a different story for another day. I do think that we're going to have to watch this battle very closely. And I think Durell, I wish he had landed at a different ACC program, maybe. But I do think he's worth watching because I do think there is some value in the Auburn running game if Hugh Freeze gets. And I love their receivers. I really do. I think they're loaded. So the running game might have a lot of open running lanes, my friends.
They spent some good money. I'm interested just to see how Auburn will do as a team.
Yes.
They're going to be a fun team to watch, I think. And going here into my spotlight player and to try and keep us moving along here, Kanye Udoh from Army this year kind of came out of nowhere. Really, the whole Army offense came out of nowhere. But 169 fantasy points. He had just under 180 carries, 1,117 rushing yards, and 10 touchdowns. It's Army. He's the fullback. They don't throw the ball. The stats are on the screen, but you can just skip them. He only had 5 games with 100 yards. And as I mentioned, his yards per carry were bumped up because he's in an option offense, and Bryson Daly playing quarterback helps take the focus of the defense sometimes off of him. What grabbed your eye the most about Udoh this last season?
I thought he played extremely well. I watched way too much Army football. For one, I'm always fascinated by the triple option. So if you've read my stuff over the years, I've always talked about Army quarterbacks, Navy quarterbacks. They haven't been good recently. We haven't had much, Air Force disappointed too. But man, when I started watching Army and Navy this year, dude, this running game at Army just popped early with Bryson Daly and Kanye Udoh. They might have been 2 of the top 10 free agent pickups over the course of the year on the waiver wire. My only concern, I love this Arizona State offense. Loved watching Cam Scatterbo in it. I am worried that the fantasy community is going to plug and play Udoh and expect Cam Scatterboo numbers.
Yep.
Cam Scatterboo is an he's great college runner. I don't see that out of Udoh yet. I think he'll be good, but I'm concerned he'll be overdrafted because I think there's going to be a lot of hype with the Sun Devils offense, and people are just going to plug and play Udoh. I don't think he approaches Cam Scatterboo's numbers.
I can agree with you and on the overvaluing of him this offseason, because one of the things to bring up of all these listed guys that I've got on the screen that could be fighting, Kason Brown's pretty darn good. He is pretty
Yes.
darn good. I think this will be a legitimate position battle that will go into the fall between Brown and Udoh. I don't know if there will be one guy that'll totally dominate the carries or not. And, Brown, some of the things about Brown, he's played in 26 career games. He's had very limited production, but he's a good pass catcher.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And that's the thing I think where Udoh struggles when you look at this offensive system and where Brown might be a better fit over the last, looking at Kenny Dillingham, we got 3 years from Arizona State, 1 year from Florida State, Auburn, and Memphis. But look over at the receiving side over the last 3 years with Arizona State and Florida State. 42 targets, 33 targets, 37 targets. I don't know if Udoh can fit that. And Brown.
We don't know.
Yeah,
We
Brown
just literally
we know can.
don't know.
And Brown we know can.
Yes.
So part of that reason why I wanted to highlight Udoh is I am a little bit like the fantasy community where I'm like, oh yeah, give me we're looking at a Cam Scatterboo rushing style back coming in here. So yeah, like that plug and play, I agree with you. But look at the fantasy points. I want everybody look at the fantasy points for the running back one. What John was saying, everyone's going to think it's 2024 Cam Scatterboo, 318 points. Look down the rest of that chart. He only had one other guy hit even above, 190 fantasy points. So this is definitely one of those situations. I'm agreeing with you 100%, John. Like, I think he's going to be overvalued. I haven't run projections or anything, but I probably would put a 200 fantasy point cap on whoever becomes, if there's a solid RB1 here at Arizona State. But the one thing that does really help them is that passing game's going to be good. And I think it's going to help keep, an extra safety out of the box, help give some room for the running back situation. But yeah, I mean, I do think, Udoh has 2 career targets because it's so hard to predict. I think it'll definitely be tough. Is there any different insights that you see on maybe how Udoh or Brown or whoever, that RB1 situation, how it might go for next year that I haven't already mentioned?
No, I just have to. Scatterboo is a special player.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why I think Dillingham will go back to the medium, what we've seen on the charts that you have posted. I just think we don't understand yet how special Scatterboo is.
I agree. All right. We're switching over to wide receivers. Keep trugging along here. We got Andrell Anthony going from Oklahoma to Duke. Justin Bowick at Ball State to Illinois. Lewis Brown, San Diego State to Colorado State. Kevin Coleman, Mississippi State to Missouri. Kevin Concepcion, NC State to Texas A&M. CJ Daniels in the portal again from LSU to Miami. And he just got himself a quarterback today, as of filming, Carson Beck. And less than 24 hours left Georgia and signed with Miami, Florida. But you got Malachi Fields going from Virginia to Notre Dame, Dane Key from Kentucky to Nebraska, McCray going from Kent State to Michigan State, and Eric Rivers, Florida International to Georgia Tech. We'll be doing our spotlight guys, again, are in green. Besides those 2 guys, John, who excites you from this list?
Well, I mean, excite me is CJ Daniels and Malachi Field, but I do want to say how kind of depressing for me Kevin Concepcion going to Texas A&M, my friend. I loved him at North Carolina State. I expected a bounce back season. He wasn't as good as he was 2 years ago this year, But man, until the Aggies show me that they're going to throw the ball with efficiency, they've had some talent come through that offense, and it just has not produced from a fantasy perspective. So this really, I have them in a dynasty league or two, so this breaks my heart on that one. Moving to Texas A&M, CJ Daniels. I think that LSU locker room was just too crowded. We had talked about him at Liberty. I just don't think he saw the number of targets he expected. Miami's got players moving on, and they just picked up Carson Beck. So I like this landing spot for Daniels. I was big into Malachi Fields. I am a little worried about the Notre Dame offense, so I have to admit that. So this is a question of talent meeting scheme. I'm going to have to look at it in more detail over the offseason. Who's the quarterback of Notre Dame next year? So, but you said excited, so I'm going to go with excited.
I'm going to predict, if I had to take a guess, Notre Dame's starting quarterback next year is Quentin Ewers.
Interesting. I mean,
I think it's possible.
Yeah,
it's very possible.
It is. So, I mean, but from an excitement, because if you've been watching Notre Dame in these playoffs, they need a receiver. It's pretty much become obvious. So I'm very interested in Malachi Fields.
Me kind of going really quick here. Justin Bowick, for those of you guys that don't know, he popped off in a couple of games from Ball State and then got hurt. But he's a guy, definitely keep your eye on him for news out of Illinois' spring camps. He could be a pretty good one. And they have a system where they will pepper the ball out to the receiver. Dane Key, I find interesting. I don't know yet my excitement level. I think this Nebraska offense can take a big jump up this year, and he could give them a home run piece. One I'm most disappointed with is McCray leaving Kent State. He was fantastic fit there. But Michigan State, I don't know yet how I'm going to feel about their offense. It might not be a bad move, but it definitely was not as good from us from a fantasy standpoint.
No.
Of staying at Michigan State there. But my spotlight guy here, Kevin Coleman. This last year at Mississippi State, he put up 202 fantasy points, had 100 targets. I always love to see 100 targets from a guy. Just shy of 1,000 yards, only 6 touchdowns, but once again, not a very good team. And so I think if he was on a better team playing in this system, he would probably had 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns easy. But he's a target machine in the Mississippi State offense. He had 10 games with 7+ targets. Did Coleman's stats get padded, do you think, because of how bad Mississippi State was, and there's a lot of built-in garbage time to his stats, or do you think his talent level matches the stats on the screen?
I think he has nice talent, but I do think there was some padding. And there was, when I watched Mississippi State, I wasn't impressed with any other receiver. So I do think that, especially early in the season, they were just peppering him with so many targets because the lack of quality, other quality components. So we'll see now, if he gets that slot position right in Missouri, that can be a very valuable position, but he's not as big as Luther Burden. Yeah. Luther Burden is let's see the value on him. I agree with you. I'm very interested I need to hear reports that he wins that slot position for the Tigers.
And of the list of guys on here, there's a lot of young 4-star talented players, but none of these guys have any proven production. None. That's the one thing Coleman really brings into this battle. And you mentioning the slot position and to be kind of like Burden, I do think this is a pretty good plug and play fit for that part of the system. Coleman was 5'11", 180. Burden's 5'11", 205. So it's one of those two where it's not like one guy was lankier than the other. And then, get Coleman in the weight room. They could get him up to 190 by the season, So I'm kind of like you. I think it could be a plug and play system here because he has played in the slot. And looking at Kirby Moore, the offensive coordinator's, history here. And now that we're doing receivers, you're going to notice I have a wide receiver role column. the 2024 is blank. I go through and view every single player and log this in my history, but I just have not had the time to do it yet, guys. Um, but that slot it's bounced between a slot in 2023, an outside guy at Fresno State, but the slot really it's I would call a slot or a balanced guy, someone who does a little bit of both, kind of like a Z receiver who might play on the outside or might play in the slot. That kind of is the way that Kirby Moore likes to go. So I'm agreeing with you. Like if he can get that slot spot, what we're seeing, Burden kind of had a down year, but every other year you're going to get over 100 targets easy. He just didn't get. He only had 81 this year, and I mean almost every year. I mean you look at even back to Fresno State in 2022, 112 targets, 83 receptions, almost 1,090 yards, only 5 touchdowns. But like I'm right there with you. I'm intrigued if he can win this job outright. I do think he's a really good fit to be a plug and play for Burden. And with that lack of an established wide receiver too as well, they had Theo Weiss in the past. Now they don't really have that. And so one of my other big takes that I see on this one is could he get more targets because they don't have someone as good at a number two spot, or could it be the other way around? I'm just curious. What are some of your general thoughts about like this 2025 outlook?
I think he has a wide range of outcomes, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
I think he could be peppered with 125 targets, or he could get lost in the weeds, not get the job, and have 50 targets. I really do. I think the range of outcomes, the variance out here could be massive unless we hear reports that indicate that he's going to get in that upper echelon of the number I presented.
And the translation for all of you watching is don't spend too high of draft capital. Find the right spot and the right value to grab him at, and he'll definitely be worth it. Your spotlight player that you wanted to go over was Eric Rivers at FIU this year, scored 217.9 fantasy points. Another guy with over 100 targets. He had 1,172 yards receiving, 12 touchdowns, another target machine as well, 9 games with 7+ targets. And he really took off in conference play, which is what we tend to see with these G5 players. What impressed you the most in 2024 about Rivers?
I think he just totally dominated the G5 competition that the Florida International was playing. I mean, again, look at these last 4 games. 295 yards receiving, 54, 125, 117. He scored 7 touchdowns in the last 4 games. For the season, over 1,100 yards, 12 touchdowns. Phenomenal season. He moves up in competition, which says don't overpay. Because I need to look at the numbers. I need to look at all the players who've gone from G5 to P4 and really see what percentage of them were able to become viable CFF players at wide receiver. My anecdotal answer is it's probably not very good, Joe. So let me just say that in general, I think we have not seen a lot of them make the jump, just like CJ Daniels last year going from Liberty to LSU. So there is risk here, but with risk is reward. If Rivers, I like Haynes King, I like this offense. They have a good offensive line. I believe in the coach. The ACC is not the SEC or the Big Ten. So I'm going to watch Rivers very closely in spring practice.
Yeah, and it's a good reason to do so, too, because pretty much the top wide receivers from that 2024 team all left in the portal from Georgia Tech. Rivers brings his buddy, Dean Patterson, over with him as well from FIU. And with this wide open competition, if I had to bet money, I would probably put Rivers and Patterson as 1-2. But some of the things with the other guys that are on the screen, Stockton has a little more combination of talent and some experience. Abdul is kind of that guy. If you're just looking for someone who has a lot of game knowledge, and sometimes they may not be that good, but they're able to break out and get a prominent spot in the offense. He might be another one of those guys to look at. I'm going to agree with you. I think this position battle could be pretty wide open, and always, pump the brakes on not being too excited with these power four group of five receivers moving up to the power four. But you mentioned this is a good offense. This is a good fit for someone that does stand out as a wide receiver one. And the last 2 years, even their wide receiver two, they're pretty similar. You don't see the same numbers in Buster Faulkner's offense that we saw before Georgia Tech. So at Southern Mississippi and at Arkansas State, that wide receiver one was hitting 180 fantasy points each year, but that number two receiver was still hitting 140, 130 fantasy points. And that's what the wide receiver one has been getting at Georgia Tech. So there's good room here. I like to call it a fantasy ceiling of like what's the top end that you can find in the stat history. There's a good ceiling here that could be hit. So, like when I kind of go over and I look at this history, that's something that excites me. And, Georgia Tech hasn't had 100 targets to their wide receiver one, but we've seen 100 targets at Southern Miss and Arkansas State. And, so I'm definitely a volume guy. And I think with, Haynes King throwing the ball, there might be a good opportunity there. Do you see the opportunity for that production jump in 2025 where it might mirror these 2019, 2018 type of numbers?
I do think the potential is there, especially I haven't looked to see how many offensive linemen are returning. So to me, that's always a
Mm-hmm.
factor. But man, I was really impressed with the Georgia Tech offensive line last year. The coach is a former offensive lineman. They dipped into the portal the year before. They upgraded the offensive line. If I see they have 4 of the 5 guys returning and they have just a bevy of starts underneath them, I will be all in with the returning third-year starter at quarterback and a veteran offensive line.
Let's go to our last batch of wide receivers here. We got Deuce Robinson at USC going over to Florida State. Devontae Ross going from Troy to Penn State. DT Sheffield, North Texas to Rutgers. Eric Singleton, Georgia Tech to Auburn. Chase Sowell, East Carolina to Iowa State. Dazon Stribling, Oklahoma State to Ole Miss. Amar Thomas, UAB to Houston. Joseph Williams, Tulsa to Colorado. Cole Wilson, Texas State to we don't know yet. And Luke Wysong, New Mexico to Arizona. We're going to be doing our spotlight players on Sowell and Stribling. Any guys that you wanted to mention here on this list?
Well, we've been talking about Georgia Tech, so let's bring up Eric Singleton. I mentioned it, man. I think this Auburn offense, and the man I haven't mentioned his name, but Cam Coleman. He's a high-star recruit. He gets lost with the Jeremiah Smith and the Ryan Williams. Cam Coleman isn't that far behind, folks. It took him a while to pop, but I watched him down the stretch. I thought he was unbelievable the last month of the season for a true freshman. Now you add Singleton to that offense. This is super interesting. I like him there. And the other guy, like Joseph Williams, man. How good was he as a true freshman for Tulsa? Once again, a G5 guy moving up in competition. But Jimmy Horn did it at Colorado. Now we have a different quarterback. But now we got Dion and this coaching staff identified Joseph Williams. I thought he was sensational for a freshman at Tulsa. How is he going to step in and do for this Colorado offense? If Dion's there, and I know, Joe, you think he's going to move on, so we still have to see some things.
Until it happens, we got to assume he's there.
Yeah. If he's there and the offense is there, I think Joseph Williams is fascinating.
A couple names that jump out to me as being intriguing. DT Sheffield going over to Rutgers. I'm a little sour on this one. Rutgers did start throwing the ball. I was amazed to see fantasy production coming out of their passing game at the end of last year. They have their returning quarterback back, but they also have their top 2 receivers coming back. So Sheffield might be one of those guys that gets lost in the shuffle in this move. Penn State, it's a little hard to say. We haven't seen a wide receiver really pop off this whole time. And so I'm a little down on Ross making that move. Let me see, you're going down the list as well. I like Amar Thomas. He just that UAB offense struggled last year. Unfortunately I'm not too high on Houston and their system. So I'm kind of down on a lot of this list. Cole Wilson, he intrigues me, which is why I put him on the list. Like the type of landing spot will matter a lot with Cole Wilson. And Luke Wysong, we've seen he's a good player. Going to Arizona, he could have. I think he has, for the non-spotlight players, I think he has pretty good breakout potential compared to the rest of this group. Outside of Williams, like you talked about, going to Colorado, it was a really good land, I think, for Colorado to get him. But John, you really wanted to go over Chase Sowell going from East Carolina over to Iowa State. This year at East Carolina, he only had about 105 fantasy points, only 58 targets. He didn't score a touchdown until October 19th. But he had a good second half of the season, despite playing with a hamstring injury, by the way. He finished 2024 as the wide receiver 3 in East Carolina's offense in terms of fantasy points. They're all kind of evenly shuffled, I think, workload-wise. What was it that you think with Sowell that you really liked, or that you liked how he fit in the offense compared to their other receivers?
This is about Matt Campbell and his ability to identify wide receivers that he likes for his system. You go all the way back to Akeem Butler, and then last year with Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. Matt Campbell has a player that he's looking for, usually tall, usually over 200 pounds, Joe. He's been very good at identifying that player. He gets them from the JUCO sometimes. So, and if you don't know, Jaden Higgins, everyone, was a JUCO wide receiver who moved all the way up to Ohio State and became a star. So what does this tell me? Matt Campbell is losing his 2 top wide receivers. What does he do? He looks around the transfer portal, he looks around the JUCO, and he says, you know what? Chase Sowell, I believe he's 6'3", 6'4", 210 pounds. He has game-breaking upside, and he's the big body wide receiver with length that Matt Campbell looks for. You know what, Joe? I'm trusting Matt Campbell.
I'm definitely gonna go into Matt Campbell here in a minute.
This is what he does. I'm buying it, and I like Sowell. The eyeball test second half of the season with East Carolina, watching Hauser throw the football. Yep. So if Matt Campbell likes him, I'm all in.
I'm with you. I like him a lot. And looking at the other guys, Daniel Jackson was hurt this year, but he's pretty good. I think he there's a legitimate chance those two guys might even split workload, but this Iowa State offense, they can afford to have more than one good fantasy wide receiver. And an understated transfer too, Xavier Townsend coming over from UCF. I think, like I said, Townsend and Jackson can both, I think, put in some fight to figure out who is that wide receiver 1. I'm like you. If I had to put a bet, I'd rather put a bet on Sowell, who's coming off of being productive, than a guy like Jackson, who's coming back from an injury. And you're mentioning Matt Campbell. A little fun fact for all of you in the audience. Matt Campbell and I played college football against each other. At the Division III level over in Ohio, he played at Mount Union College. I played at Wilmington College in Ohio. And my last year of my playing career was the 1 year that I played against him. Then I coached 1 year while he was still playing at Mount Union. So I know Matt Campbell very well. and they had a brand new offensive coordinator this year. So I'm relying on his stats, Campbell's stats, because we've got a good deep history here of all of these backs, or all these wide receivers. And the worst production that you saw out of a wide receiver 1 was 2019. Like the only time that someone went under 150 points, and so with the 6 year that we've got out of Iowa State, a career average for wide receiver 1 of 184.5 fantasy points, 2023, only season wide receiver one had less than 100 targets. That's why we love this system. Um, you know, looking at the touchdowns, they typically kind of get balanced between wide receiver one and wide receiver two. You don't really see a year where it's top heavy over at the wide receiver one until you go all the way down to, like you said, Hakeem Butler, 2018. So the nice thing and what I really like about this is even if Sowell doesn't become the wide receiver one, because we know there is some other talent there, there's still value in him if he does fall back and become the wide receiver two in this offense, which is what makes this, to me, so intriguing. And I think I definitely will be going after a number of shares in Sowell because you can still win if you strike out on him being wide receiver one. What are your thoughts for how he fits in for 2025?
I mean, I'm salivating. I definitely am interested in this young man. I think his best ball upside is tremendous because even though, well, what maybe 2 out of 3 games, Higgins was the star, and then the other one, Noel would be the star. So there's definitely value there. They have Rocco Beck. This is going to be entering his 3rd year at the quarterback. We know the system Matt Campbell is going to employ. I'm all in, my friend.
I'm right there with you. I'm feeling pretty good about it. One guy, I'm not sure yet how I feel about him, but I love his potential. Is Dazon Stribling? He's making the move from Oklahoma State to Ole Miss. This year, Oklahoma State, while they were rotating pretty much 3 wide receivers who were all being, finding fantasy value. Maybe not like every week all 3 of them were, but it was bouncing between 3 different guys. He still managed to get 94 targets, 52 receptions, almost 900 yards, and 6 touchdowns. I think what really held him back was the inconsistency at the quarterback position this year. And, there was times where Stribling looked like he was the wide receiver one in this offense, other times the wide receiver 3. So it made it hard to anticipate how reliable he could be week to week this year if you're trying to set a lineup versus like a best ball format. Were you as impressed as I was with Stribling's athletic ability this season, or like I said, potential is what has me really excited about him, or was there something else that grabbed your eye?
So I thought Stribling won because of scheme and size. I would not call him an uber separator. That's just my anecdotal. I haven't placed him under the microscope for a draft prospect yet. So my concern, the defensive backs in the SEC in general are better than the defensive backs in the Big 12. So what does that tell me? That Stribling might need to rely more on athleticism, nuance, and being able to create separation than he did at Oklahoma State. And that concerns me. I'm not sure if he's that level of an athlete. He could out jump and out physical people. And Gundy, I mean, they fell apart, but Gundy does have pretty good schemes where he had some pretty wide open plays. I don't know if that's going to happen. It is an interesting landing spot, but I'm going to remain open-minded about where he falls in the pecking order.
I'm going to be that way too, because when you look at this list of guys, not all of them are experienced, but it's a long list to start with.
It's a long list.
It's a long list. So there's a lot of guys there, and trust me, I bet you Lane Kiffin's going to bring in at least 2 more wide receivers in the spring portal. But Kaidon Lee is a guy who I'm really excited about his future at Ole Miss. He's one of the guys that I kept on the keeper league that John plays in that I run. I grabbed Kaidon Lee as a possible guy that I might hang on to because he does have the ability to be the wide receiver one in this offense. And I do believe that as long as Antwine Wells is there, if he can get fully healthy, you have to keep him in mind as someone that could also steal away targets. Deuce Alexander isn't a bad option there, but Caleb Cunningham, the 5-star freshman coming in, is another guy I think you're going to have to keep an eye on. And this is just going to be a trend for Ole Miss as long as Lane Kiffin's there. All you guys watching is Trey Harris. We see big points get put up, but he's just going to have a bunch of talent. And I don't think you can just think of something as a plug and play in this Mississippi offense. I think Lee is the most fitted guy to be a plug and play into the wide receiver one. But Wells is another guy too. Like if he's healthy, he's not as talented, but he has the playing experience that he could take over a wide receiver one. So a big thing as I'm looking at this, I kind of mentioned, I don't know if I want to call Stribling the wide receiver one here, but I think he has the ability that he could be. So this is kind of like what we talked about on the last one. You need to look at him as he could land as a wide receiver one or a wide receiver two. So you need to view both sets of numbers. Um, would you agree with me that we might not have that Trey Harris explosive guy? And do you think anyone besides Stribling might fit that role for next year, or do you think Stribling has the best bet to do it?
Well, and let's think about Elijah Moore also in this Lane Kiffin offense at Mississippi. And one of the things that I will say in general between Trey Harris and Elijah Moore is they were uber athletes who could get separation. And I also, maybe if my memory serves me, I don't think Stribling played in the slot a lot at Oklahoma State. I'm pretty sure he was the outside X receiver.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was.
Harris and Elijah Moore did eat. I mean, they ate at the buffet with mismatches in the slot at Mississippi. I am open-minded that he could be. I would not bet on it, and I think Kaidon Lee might be the guy, but isn't he super small? I think I remember looking up Kaidon Lee one time. I think he's a little undersized. It's just what my perspective is. I think he's like around 170 maybe. Is he? So I wonder if that's why he got a bigger receiver. I need to hear a lot in the spring training. Spring camp? What is happening with Mississippi?
Yeah, and that's the big reason why I wanted to cover Stribling here for all of you guys watching. Is this is going to be a really interesting situation. Don't like Stribling could be wide receiver one or wide receiver three. So there's a lot of if I had to bet on one guy in this wide receiver room, I'd bet on Kaidon Lee. That's kind of where I would lean. But Stribling, you need to have attention on him and to see where things are going. So I do think keep him in mind, but keep your excitement down, folks. And to try and get us going here, the very last group of players that we are going long today. Tight ends, we have got Blake Bosma from Western Michigan, who has not signed yet. Kind of surprised on that one. Kenyon Burnett going from Arizona to Kansas. Terrence Carter, Louisiana Lafayette to Texas Tech. Dorian Fleming, Georgia State to Maryland. Luke Hands, Arkansas to Mississippi. Jamari Johnson, Louisville to Oregon. Max Clark from Purdue to Ohio State. Tanner Koziel, Ball State to Wisconsin. Jaden Platt, Texas A&M to Arkansas. And Bauer Sharp, Oklahoma to LSU. Our spotlight guys are highlighted in green again. Any guys that you want to make any comments on here?
So it's going to be hard for me to get a judgment on Terrence Carter until spring practices. Tight end position can be fickle, Joe. We played long enough in college fantasy football. It is definitely, even compared to the NFL, it's harder at the tight end position than anything. Terrence Carter was exceptional at times for the Louisiana Cajuns. How's he going to do in the Big 12 at Texas Tech? I need to see reports coming up. And I love Tanner Koziel I can't believe it, Ball State. He was one of my favorites this year. And now going to Wisconsin, good system. What's the ceiling? He had such a good ceiling at Ball State in the MAC conference. So there's a lot of question marks at this position.
Talking about Terrence Carter, one reason why he was so productive from a fantasy standpoint, he was the best receiver.
Yes.
So you're now going to go to an offense where the tight end isn't being targeted like the wide receiver one. So he is a guy I'm going to be down on just because it's going to be his role is going to be completely different now in this new system. I do want to see where Bosma ends up. Dorian Fleming, he intrigues me at Maryland. I'm going to say that. I really need to dive in the numbers more, but he intrigues me quite a bit. I like Clark to Ohio State, especially if they decide they didn't really have, I don't think, a good enough tight end to feature enough. Clark could be pretty good, I think, in that Ohio State system. And, going down now to your pick to go over, you liked Sharp here. in 2024 in a, as we were talking about earlier, a very poor Oklahoma offense. He put up 62 points and he got 58 targets, which I really like out of him. He looks, he doesn't look as athletic as he plays. That's kind of one thing that I like to mention about Sharp. 42 receptions, 300 yards, 2 touchdowns. Only had one game with 10 plus fantasy points, but we are talking about tight ends. And he only had 2 touchdowns all year. So, what was it that jumped out to you that you liked about Sharp's play this season?
The eyeball test told me he's pretty good. I mean, I just think that Oklahoma passing game just completely fell apart, and I just don't think he had very positive matchups. And what I find intriguing, we know LSU will have wide receivers. They have Garrett Nussmeier coming back, so we're getting a good quarterback second year in the system. Now, why can't I remember the young man's name who was in the bowl game, the 6'7" tight end who was very impressive? Oh my God, he had such a good bowl game he had 2 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns for LSU.
I missed that one.
Oh my God, he was a freshman. And so my concern is LSU going to go to a 2 tight end? That's it. Trade that Green. Oh my dude. He was really impressive in the bowl game. So I was like, why are they bringing in Bauer Sharp? Are they going to try to run the ball maybe? Or are they going to play 2 tight end sets? I'll say this. I think it gives LSU a lot of opportunity to be very different. Bauer Sharp and this Green young man, they can be a very nasty pair. Or will they move Green out to the big slot H-back? Because he's seen, I think he's 240. So he's on the 6'7". So is Bauer going to be the more traditional short yardage, the tight end who gets the nasty, dirty stuff? Green going to be the home run hitting tight end, big slot? I just think it's fascinating. I think LSU brought in a lot of talent.
And Green scored 4 touchdowns on just 13 targets. So dude, it's definitely interesting to keep an eye on how are they going to be used.
Yes.
And, when you start getting into, there's not a lot of stats here looking at Joe Sloan, the offensive coordinator. But, what I do like is they do throw to the tight end, whether it was at LSU or Louisiana Tech. The touchdowns is my biggest takeaway of what I'm going to look for and try and anticipate for, Sharp going into this year is, like we said, with Green, could he get all the red zone targets instead? And Sharp is in there to kind of play that H-back who will, slide behind the O-line on a split zone play for run blocking. I think the touchdowns is going to be the biggest factor of, whether or not you're going to see any real fantasy value out of, Sloan here, or excuse me, from Sharp. And I would just say don't take him as your first tight end in a draft would be my biggest advice on this one. Another guy to do our last spotlight here. I'm bringing this one up because I find this really intriguing. Jamari Johnson. He didn't have a lot of playing time this year at Louisville. Only 19 targets. He had 13 receptions for 158 yards and 1 touchdown. He did not play after October 19th. And, as a backup, he had 3 games with 3+ targets. So you look at a small handful of games, not a lot of targets, but he had times where he could get the ball 3 or more times in a game, which stands out to me. And he's got huge talent. I think he's a star waiting to be born. And what makes this situation at Oregon so interesting to me is that Kenyon Sadiq is another huge talent, future star.
I'm like, I like Kenyon Sadiq, and then they brought in Johnson. I'm like, why? Because I like Sadiq so much.
I know, and Sadiq would have been a perfect plug and play without Johnson. And
yes.
and Sadiq looked really good in the Big Ten title game against Penn State. He doesn't get a lot of sample size to see him, but he looked very good against a top-notch defense. So, this is a tough one. I have no clue how this will play out between these two guys. like looking at the depth chart, looking at what we've seen from Sadiq, and it's limited from both these guys. Like, you had to bet $10 today. Who do you think comes out as the tight end one out of this tight end room that we got on the screen?
I would bet Sadiq because I've been so into him and I thought he was so good at times. Now they had other talent and they didn't use him. But man, if my memory serves me, he was a true freshman this year, correct?
I believe
Like
so.
so I mean, I was all in on Sadiq. I still like him a ton, but Johnson definitely throws a monkey wrench in him. Definitely throws a monkey wrench.
Well, and one thing I really find interesting here. So look at Will Stein as the offensive coordinator. We got 2 years at Oregon, 1 year at UTSA. His tight ends average about 83 fantasy points. So we got a good system for tight end production. And the tight ends at Oregon have always hit 50 targets. What intrigues me is if the offense uses both of these guys on the field together this year. And, do you think that you might see Oregon running more, you know, 2 tight end sets, even though and these guys are athletic enough, they could be spread out and playing a slot, but
Yeah,
more 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends than what we traditionally see out of them of 1 tight end, 3 receivers. I could anticipate that happening. And now these stats that we're looking at for the tight end 1 could get eaten into because both those guys are sharing time on the field.
I think they want versatility. I think any good coach realizes that the more versatile your offensive attack is, probably the better you will be in the long run if you have the talent to run it. So what this tells me is Oregon is willing to do some new things with formations. And I do think you could put both these big tight ends on the field and use them. I mean, I think Sadiq can get open down the seam. I mean, I think he's really talented. He's the type of tight end, he might be an efficiency monster where you get 6 targets, but he might have 4 receptions for 80 yards and a touchdown. Mm-hmm. I think Johnson and him, if I'm reading the tea leaves, it seems like Oregon wants to be more versatile in its attack.
With a young quarterback taking over, it definitely makes sense. That's assuming Oregon doesn't go and sign another veteran in the portal. I don't think they will.
Yes.
I don't think they will. I think more they know is their future, and if they don't play him, they're kind of screwed.
They're in trouble.
That's another thing we didn't mention at the start of the show that I kind of throw in now, and as we're wrapping up the show here, when you get that really good young player, I think the coaches understand that we might have to take a year where we can't go get a 1-year starter to keep us afloat for a year. This guy sat on the bench last year. We know he's inexperienced. We just have to throw him to the wolves or lose him forever. And that's something I'm finding interesting. And there's some situations I've been going through, looking at depth charts and everything, getting ready to do my way too early player rankings. And I'm like, I think there's some teams that might just have to stay with an inexperienced quarterback because they're that good player on the roster and they can't afford to lose them. So I think that's another thing that hasn't been brought up enough is there might be teams where there's a lot of high expectations, like in Oregon, for example. Yeah, they may not go get a veteran because you're going to have to keep that young guy happy and on the team. So I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank everybody for watching the 2025 Winter Transfer Portal Update show here on the Let Purple Rain podcast. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Once again, I want to thank today's guest, the one, the only, the Gridiron Scholar, John Laub. Tell everybody about what you have coming up with your work in both the NFL and the college football spaces.
Well, thanks for having me on, Joe. And it's a pleasure to be your first guest on your first show. So I really appreciate that. I did have a blast. You have made me study the transfer portal even in more detail, which I appreciate. Normally, I would just be doing NFL draft stuff and put off the college. I just have my side list, right? These are guys I got to look at around March. But you made me dig deeper, and I appreciate that very much. And it's NFL draft season, mostly for me. Check out all my stuff on the Rookie Big Board. We're doing a Senior Bowl preview series. And this is where it really helps playing college football. I tell this to everyone. I know the entire player pool. As more players go to the Senior Bowl, I'm like, oh, yeah, I've seen them for 3 years. I watched him for 2 years. I mean, it's such an advantage to play college fantasy football if you like NFL football, if you want to do prospects, because we've seen all these players. And that's my video series, but my written series is on playerprofiler.com. And within 2 weeks, my quarterback previews are coming out on Player Profiler.
Very nice. And for any of you guys that do NFL fantasy, John is definitely worth following. Also, if any of you guys play Campus to Canton leagues, throw out our buddies' names there at Campus to Canton. John's a great resource for you, man. Besides all the great talent they have over at Campus to Canton.
Oh yeah,
you guys are awesome. But definitely want to plug, their format as well. If you guys like that stuff, John is a great resource. Like I told you at the start of the show, guys, I've known John since the early 2010s. He's entering his 10th year in my private home league, which by the way is a killer. It is so hard.
It's a killer.
It's a killer. And considering that I brought up the league, congratulations, DJ. My brother won the league this year. He was the guy who won it. It's tough, and it's his first title. I don't think we only have one person in our home league that has ever won it more than twice. So it's tough winning that league, and that league I swear gets tougher every year. But like I said, I've known John for a really long time, both professionally and just like on the side, playing leagues every year. So like John's an awesome resource. Definitely recommend. Always follow him, and the @ that I have, the Gridiron Scholar 91, is your X. I know you also have moved to Blue Sky. Do you want to plug your handle there?
Yeah, it's the Gridiron Scholar 91. I got Scholar on Blue Sky. So check it out over there, everyone. I like Blue Sky. I'm having fun, got to build up a following. It's a new social media site. But yeah, follow me, Gridiron Scholar. I think it's like at Blue Sky or Blue Dots. I don't know exactly, but yeah, you can find me easy on Blue Sky.
All right, and to go over a little bit here with what I've got coming for you guys. Here in January, we've got, after this, I'll be doing a Coaches Changes update, which is going to be a very detailed and in-depth article. I'm going to have everything all the way down to assistant offensive coordinators, where all the changes have taken place, where guys have come from. And then at the end of January here, I'm going to be wrapping it up with the 2025 way too early player rankings. That is going to be available via the podcast here. And in February, I'm going to be giving you the perfect primer to get ready for spring camps. I'm going to be going through the different positions, and going over burning questions that I have for players, team situations at those positions, as well as highlighting different position battles to keep an eye on. So all of that's going to be coming throughout all of February. And I'll be doing a wrap up of the burning questions at the end of the month with another great guest here on the show. But I want to thank all of you guys for reading and watching at letpurplerain.com and here on YouTube. You guys are the reasons I'm able to keep doing this work. Your support means more than you know. I'm extremely grateful, guys. So once again, please like and subscribe. Thanks for joining the Let Purple Rain podcast. Your CFF reign starts here.